economic, societal, and government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
Hey, and welcome to Mini Ice Age Conversations, rebranded as Civilization Cycle Podcast. Welcome this evening. We were having a little bit of trouble getting on here. I'm adding Ransom Godwin, so welcome to Civilization Cycle. And what are we going to be moving into this evening's conversation is, I tell you, the amount of news that I'm trying to grind through this week is all about rice shortages in Japan. It's about Dollar Store, Dollar General closing, and now because of their stock miss, thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of locations. But see, here's the thing. I want to relate this personally, if I can tell a personal story to kind of start off the hour here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and waiting for this small tech issue. But, I appreciate your time. And thank you so much for, listening to our conversation, trying to join in, and then also have other conversations to, solve this giant conundrum that we're moving into together. Because I'm looking out at this whole thing here with the Dollar General store. So, I live in a small town in East Tennessee. There's the population's barely 1,000. You can probably find out where I am by looking at the census. It's 990 something. But there was a Dollar General store and they closed. And we're like, oh, wow, now we need to drive 25 miles if we just want something simple. Now, there's a couple gas stations here, but, they have mainly just the drinks and a few things of milk. They have no sour cream. There's no, there's not supermarket stuff. It's instant consumption stuff in these gas stations as you're driving down the road. So, I can drive 25 miles and I can go get, everything in a supermarket at a Food Line, or I can go to Walmart. I can go somewhere like this. There's, what else is over there? I'm trying to think about what other, that's it. pretty much in the town. You drive 25 miles, you get a Food Lion supermarket, which has everything, but it's a little expensive, but it's high quality stuff. Or you can go over to Walmart. They have a mix of some of the high quality stuff, plus, their own Walmart brand, kind of lower tiered thing. And that's the whole thing about price point, right? So the Dollar General closed in our town, and it was down for a while, for like 4 or 5 months. And then they opened up with this new like Dollar General Supercenter / supermarket / whatever, just a few months back. So for us now, we can go there, and I tell you what, they're almost out of a lot of stuff all the time. So even if you want to go for sour cream, or you want to go get ice cream, you want to go get milk, or you want to get something like this, or like whipping cream, we do a lot of different types of cream cheese cakes here, because it's just easy to bake that kind of thing, and we have fresh fruit we throw into it. But me, I have the money to drive 25 miles and blow 2 gallons of gas for $6 to go buy some stuff. But if we go, we're going to buy a lot. We're not going to buy like $2 worth of stuff and come home. Think about the people who can't afford that. And we're looking at massive reductions in now just consumer availability of foods. That's the whole thing. Japan's over on this thing where their government's paying farmers not to grow food, not rice specifically. And then in England, they're doing the same thing. They're paying farmers thousands and thousands of pounds every year above their normal, what would be revenue, not to grow food. So let's say I'm a farmer and I would earn 100,000 US or 100,000 pounds a year. Government will come in and say, all right, we've seen your tax records. We kind of know how your farm operates. We'll give you 300,000 pounds per year not to grow food for the next 3 years. So we'll give you almost 1 million pounds to not do a single thing. Not a single thing. Just don't grow food. They don't care if you like till over the land to keep it sort of so the trees and the shrubs and all that stuff doesn't grow back up. But now it's happening in multiple countries. And now China is absolutely restricting exports of its foodstuffs out of China. Now, China's a pretty big producer too. And a lot of lower hanging fruit countries in Africa, they don't care if all the chemicals and things that are banned in the United States and banned in Europe get on the crops. Like they don't care if there's like DDT, malathions, this sort of stuff. They just don't care. Glyphosate, that's like the lightest of the stuff. So China sprays heavy. They do an enormous amount of ag biz. They use stuff that we can't use. Mexico does too, by the way. So beware. There's a lot of things in Mexico that are allowed to be put on a crop to kill pests that is not allowed in the U.S. So anyway, there's a huge market for that outside of the Western world. So everywhere you look, the amount of food, the availability is shrinking. So all those people that used to buy Chinese grains, all those countries, like where are they going to get their food from? And Ransom's going to talk tonight a little bit about what he thinks of Ukraine and the reason that the Ukraine war is going on. We got another major breadbasket offline. Oblast, which is one of these areas where Ukraine's invading into, is one of the largest oat growing areas on the planet. Oats. So, oats is also a canary in the coal mine. And this is where I wanted to kind of preface the show. And I'm going into, there's way less choice. There's going to be far less choice, and your prices are going to go up because a lot of places are closing that you used to buy food at. They're going to force you into other places. Like the banks. We used to have 2 banks out here. I'm not going to name them. But they both closed, and now I got to drive 60 miles to go to the damn bank. Can you believe that? 60 miles. I need to actually go to my own ATM where I don't have to pay a service fee. But the actual bank that I use, the next closest one is a fair distance. It takes about, I'd say 60 minutes to drive there. But we're talking on semi-windy roads and then up, rural highways and things. A good 55 to 60 miles away. So this is happening not only with food sources, but also with banking. So then they want to force you to online banking. They want to force you to online purchases. They want to force you into different higher tiered items. But as I look around this thing here with why is Ukraine going offline? Why is Japan experiencing rice shortages? And this should kind of shake your head here. Because in Japan, they always grew enough for what they always needed. They never, Japan was an anomaly. They just didn't import rice because they grew everything they needed all the time since World War II. Yet this year, right now, they magically need to switch over to try to think about imports because them taking land, they call it acreage reduction, where the government's pay is to take this many acres offline every single year, has now come to that rollover point where, the rice price doubled this year, and now they need to bring in imports because they can't grow enough rice anymore. Now, if you can't see this as a grand plan moving out in front of us, then maybe you need to take the blinders off for just a second, because your food price and my food price, if you're not growing it, you are absolutely in a pinch. So, Ransom, I appreciate you joining me tonight. Thanks so much. And the floor is yours, man, because you wanted to talk about Ukraine for a minute and the reasons you thought that they were taking food offline there. Ransom, you're on mute still.
Sorry, I had a redundant mute I forgot about. Yeah.
We all do that.
This is
late night.
Right. This is the food deserts we're kind of talking about. I don't know, last year, maybe the year before that, the food deserts that were going to show up. And a lot of that problem was stemming from the stores, like you kind of mentioned there. They don't really sell real food. They sell junk, basically. Like it's a cross between Walmart and the convenience store, most of those stores. And they popped everywhere up, like early 2000s. They replaced a lot of areas of mom and pop stores. And then when the pandemic hit, the last seemingly little grocery stores and mom and pop shops that sold real food, they're gone, which left everybody, especially in lower income areas. Like, matter of fact, I have a dollar store that moved in not far from where I live, that probably the whole area gets most of their food from. And if you've been in there and you look at the food that they're selling, well, you'll realize why everybody's diabetic and, having troubles these days. It's a food desert. There's no real food in there, so to speak. You got your high fructose corn syrups and your excitotoxin group of foods like potato chips and all of that stuff. But they do sell like hamburger meat, but it's like an overpriced, gross, little pound of it or something like that that's frozen. So these food deserts showed up, and the Walmarts and other grocery stores that were kind of sparsed out centralized their locations and super centers, neighborhood markets. Sometimes if you live in a wealthier area, they'll pop one of those up. But even when you go in those stores, there's no choice. There's two brands, maybe, of each product, and one of those brands happens to be the house brand, like whatever grocery store you're going to. Walmart does that too. They have their great value brand that's next to a name brand, and you might possibly get three different choices. But as far as organics and clean foods, you're not going to find much of that unless you live in specific areas that demand that kind of food be there. So more affluent areas and richer areas may get those organic foods delivered more often and be in stock in their store, but not in poor areas. They have no choice for real food at all. They have no idea. This is what's sad, is most of them have no idea what's in their food. And recently I've been trying to do the farming thing for the last couple years. And now I know that my valley is saturated in forever chemicals. Matter of fact, they're closing down, and there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits soon from the Air Force base that I live next to. Probably about 7 miles, I think, is the distance through the desert. And then the Air Force property starts, and they're completely contaminated with forever chemicals to, unprecedented levels. And there's been all kinds of people that live there, use the water there. They have the little restaurants in there that use the tap water. And now the federal government is openly admitting that, yes, there is enough fluoride in the water to deduct several IQ points off of your children. And that's been happening for decades and decades and decades. So we're really talking about giant food deserts where you can't get clean food. And I didn't even bring up some of the things that you were talking about that's going to be on your food. And I hate to tell you, even if you're getting organic food from the grocery store, they use the same supply chains and the same distribution machines and all kinds of different things like that. So even your organic food is going to have levels of these other things in it that you are trying to avoid. So they're going to have a bunch of forever chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. The list goes on. And, we've basically as a society admitted that we're poisoning ourselves, which brings me to Ukraine, actually. I don't know how much you know about the Chernobyl disaster that happened in 1986. But it was a lot worse than the world actually knew about. The fact that they almost made Europe non-livable with one accident, and when I mean unlivable, I really mean that. The amount of radiation that was going to be pouring into the groundwater was going to poison all of Western Europe, or excuse me, Eastern Europe, from the tip top of Poland all the way down to the Black Sea. And you were just speaking of, this is a big grow zone for Europe and Russia, both. So that's the area that's actually in play. And whenever they repaired this facility, they didn't repair it. They covered it up, so to speak. And that's not a pun. They covered it up in more ways than one. It's probably estimated from outside Western sources that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people ultimately died from the accident, even though I think Russia still listed as like 31 people or something like that, even to this day. But we know better. We know a lot of people died. But that wasn't even really the worst part. If it had gone completely critical and hit the water that was underneath it in the ground area, or if their tanks that they had there to cool it off would have came in contact with that, it would have made an explosion that wiped out Europe at the time and covered everything in radioactive fallout. No one was going to be eaten, which would have meant upwards of 60 to 100 million people would have had to migrate out of there. Now, the reason I bring this up is we all know the war that's happening in Ukraine, and a little bit of people, or very few people, know that the areas that are being contested are where a lot of nuclear reactors, including the Chernobyl accident, is at. Now, they've been having construction over the decades to try to get underneath it to put a more concrete padding around it to contain it. The problem was when they originally fixed it, it had, at best, an estimated shelf life of 100 years. And since then, there have been cracks, leaks, all kinds of other things. So if the maintenance, so to speak, stops there, which is very likely because, well, it's in a contested area, eventually that stuff is going to go down into the groundwater, and there's going to be a major no-go zone, no-grow zone for food. Once that gets in the water, everything to the Black Sea and all around, like the whole area. I think they got to have a really good map here. So we're talking Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, and portions of Russia, and probably effects on the other side of the Black Sea as well, considering the whole area. Fish is there, and they do all kinds of stuff there. So this would be a major thing. So it may be that they know something that we don't. And this is complete conjecture, but there's a couple different scenarios that would make it more than conjecture. And that is if any kind of damage or bombing happens in this area, that's going to be a problem. If neglect of the projects that are ongoing to try to contain it, which are ongoing, the latest one that I think was completed in 2017 still had the same estimation of the original 100-year span to contain it. And what I'm talking about is they dug under it, a bunch of miners dug a big hole under it, and then they filled it up with cement so that when this material got down and started melting through the earth there, it would kind of stop there, but it ain't going to stop. So what I'm saying is in the next 40 to 50 years, a major issue may be at play in this area by neglect, by war, or just the natural course of the original accident, because kind of when they were truthful and explained what would happen, people had no idea how many millions of people would be affected by just one facility if it didn't have 24-hour constant upkeep and manpower to monitor it and do everything right. Now, it happened to be at the time that I'm not going to call them DEI, because that's not how they did things in the Soviet Union. More like if you graduated school in a certain field, they said, hey, you're going to go work over there. And you're like, oh, thank you, because you need a job and you probably have a family.
Or ransom, they would put prisoners out there in exchange for leniency as well.
Well, I'm talking about the original management of the facility before it even had a problem. Those people were inexperienced. They were like 20-year-olds that barely got out of college. They didn't know how to run the equipment. And then this scenario unfolded from a design flaw that, of course, the Soviet Union didn't want to admit to. They knew about it, but it was classified at the time. So they had no idea that when they tried to turn it off, it would actually be an ignition button to a nuclear disaster. But in the months that followed, the whole world actually got to find out what happened, because the head guy that was in charge of the cleanup left some diaries behind and let himself out the easy way, because he was dosed heavily with radiation too. But he let the world know there was a design flaw on top of incompetence, because not knowing education, but they had no real experience. And the reason I even bring up that portion of it is because we're going through those stages today in the United States. And even on the last episode, I was showing how NASA's having a bunch of problems because they have inexperienced workers doing the welding. You remember the conversation we had about that. This is going to be happening major, but now add war on top of the whole area and instability. And now who's going to be taking care of these things that actually have to be manned all the time? And if the original 100 years holds up, then maybe you won't have to worry for, several more decades. But it's already been 40 years ish, So that's if they were telling the truth, which through the whole process they did not. Just keep that in mind. They did not tell the truth through the whole process. So when they gave an estimate of 100 years, that may not actually be the truth. So we may be seeing a whole area there in northern Ukraine that's just totally off the map, and subsequently areas near it off the map. And that may be why there are so many investors trying to move their resources to a new growth zone. Not only for just this one reason, but all of the other, geopolitical and regulatory reasons that they've now put on Europeans to not grow food and don't do this and don't do that. And then upcoming wars, not to mention the evaporation of basic fundamental rights and once in what was known once as the free world, which was, Western Europe. And it's so bizarre that the Soviet Union is going and, pretending they're going to take our old way of life and run with it. But they're still very heavily tied to the Chinese and where the Chinese are going. So I don't know if you want to add to that. You were just talking about the food, but if you can imagine, this is just one reactor, one facility that already had an accident. Now, there's others in play there. And not to mention, I don't know if we're allowed to say it, but there's those other kind of scientists that deal with messing around with genes and stuff that have all kinds of facilities that are in play, too, that were left behind by one superpower or another.
Yeah, I could dovetail on something here. As a matter of fact, again, a personal story for you. Tonight, we got some fresh sour cream from the Amish. We have this mozzarella cheese that they did as well, because we have to order it in advance. So I was like, all right, let's go get some crackers. And I wasn't shopping at the time. My wife picked up a bunch of stuff. And then I got home and I was like looking at the box here, because I do read the labels. I'm one of those label reader kind of geeks that'll actually turn over the box. I'm the freak that's in the aisle kind of studying that, going, and you'll see me put it back if there's too much stuff in it. Now, for me, I've read a lot of labels in my life, right? So I'm very familiar with, like soybean oils and high fructose corn syrups and mononitrates and these kind of things. So you see different phosphates and different kind of acids and this type of thing in there, and monocalciums, and okay, that's okay, it's semi-natural-ish sort of. But I came across something I'd never seen on a box tonight, and it was called TBHQ. And I was with soybean oil, so I'm like, oh, okay, the folic acid. And I'm thinking to myself, what is this stuff? Because I'd never heard of it before. It's TBHQ. I encourage everybody out there to do a deep dive on what this is. The way that they put it in the food, they're like, well, it's an additive that makes the oil in the cracker not go rancid, because if the company produced the cracker, you probably got like a 2-week shelf life on it. It won't stay crispy. The oils will start to turn on themselves. And anybody out there doing, long-term storage, if you're going to try to store some oils back for your, bug out location or some sort of readiness, preparedness type of thing, that's one thing we always battle with, is how do you keep oils? And for me, I've kind of just defaulted back to lard. Lard has been demonized through the last, 30, 40 years, but that's what everybody used prior to us for the last 8,000 years. So you can believe versions of history where people lived only to be 50 years old, or you can believe or listen to older versions of history where people lived to be multi-hundreds, if not, 1,000 years old, like Methuselah in the Bible as a reference, so we put some kind of context to this. So for the last 8,000 years, everybody's using lard and tallow and that sort of thing. But then suddenly today, that's all bad, and then we need to come over to these like soybean oils and canola oils and this sort of thing that's processed at super high heat. But I'd never seen this TBHQ before, ever on a label. It's my very, very first time, so I was enthralled by it. And I looked, and OMG, you really need to do a deep dive on this one. Because I can't even believe this thing's allowed in our food, right? So I haven't even opened the box. Didn't even open it. I was just so enthralled by reading the box, because this thing was club crackers. Like, my mom used to buy these things. Because just on a personal thing, my mom used to like to have people over, either in the daytime, and they would cook stuff together. We'd have tea. I didn't drink coffee at the time, but my mom would always let me have tea with some of the desserts and things, and her friends would come over, and she would host a lot. That's all I'm going to say. She loved to host. That was her thing. Like, some people have hobbies, like they go, like gardening is a hobby. Well, her thing was just like hosting and just having friendly people over that just like to, chat for the day and enjoy and even create things together, like cakes and that sort of stuff. So, I even learned to bake when I was a kid, because my mom and her friends come over and they would bake something early in the afternoon, and they would run out and do some shopping or whatever, and then come back, and then this sort of thing. So, one of these things, club crackers, I always remember those as a kid. And so this time I was like, okay, when I got that box of club crackers, that can't be too bad. It's probably like wheat in it and some sort of, but this has got like 75 ingredients in it. I'm looking, I go, what? Are you kidding me? So, and again, just on a rant here, please check out TBHQ in your food as an additive. If you see it, put the box back on the shelf. That's just a personal opinion. That's no different than me writing into, I had a bad experience at Airbnb or whatever it is. It's my personal opinion. It's nothing about a company. It's about my own personal feeling about it, and I will accept that as my own thought on me, David, saying, I don't like that. I don't think it's a good thing for me personally. So just do your own research. I know remember a few years ago, they're like, telling people to do their own research was sort of a negative also. Like, hey, don't believe me, just do your own research, right? Remember that whole thing went around like 2016, 17, like, you can't tell people to do their own research. They have to believe what the newspapers write, or they have to believe what the magazines write, or what the news heads, the talking bobbleheads say to you. But I will, come back to that point there, Ransom, with you. I'm going to split a hair here with everybody out. So Ransom's talking about with the contamination of water in reservoirs. I will agree But at the same time, well, I will also say to another thought, there is something called primary water out there that Deborah Tavares is super into, and she has mapped out these areas around the planet. Now, what we understand as aquifers, quote unquote, they're either a closed aquifer, like a closed bowl, or they're cracked and open where hydrogen and oxygen within our crust itself create new water that's not from oceans, rivers, rainfall, or something else. It's actually being produced within the crust of our planet through pressures and chemical processes. Hydrogen and oxygen are breaking out of, let's say, mineral substrate, and we call those rocks for a better term on the crust. And those things, the hydrogen atom will come out, an oxygen atom will come out, and there'll be two oxygen atoms, and boom, they'll slam together and they'll make water. Like water is continuously being made 300 miles below your feet, continuously, forever, and like into the future forever. There's new water being made on our planet. Now, some of these areas, it comes out. Like Gaddafi had hit one of those areas in Libya, and he was trying to bring all that water out in to irrigate the desert and give free food to the people, free medical, and then charge people gold for his oil instead of taking US dollars. And you know what happened to him. But there is a primary water source under Libya, and it's not the only one. There's several other around the world. They're not everywhere. But I will tell you also there's primary oil, abiotic oil reserves as well around our world. And there's one that's in the Gulf of Mexico, and they try to tap into it, and boom. You've seen the rigs go down when they get overpressurized, because when you're coming into a main vein like that, that is the thing that is repressurizing and refilling all of the other oil wells, even 1,000 miles out from it. It's like the inverted. If you look at a tree, turn it upside down, you have that main trunk coming up, but everything, all those branches and all those, stems going out, those were like major oil fields off in Oklahoma. Those are major oil fields off in California. But they were being fed by the primary oil abiotic source coming out of areas in. So you're looking at Deepwater Horizon. They tried to say that was the whole thing. It was Deepwater Horizon was an experiment. I'm going to go way woo-woo and deep on you. If you don't know about tertiary oil recovery and actually taking samples of microbes in these wells to try to replicate those. And what you do is you take a sample from a well. So let's say the well's kind of running out, and you try to push water down there, and you got some, but you're like, well, there's way more because there's a lot of trapped reserves in there. You'll take the bacteria out of that, and you'll grow it in a petri dish, but not just a petri dish. We're talking about like thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of this, and then you force it back down in the well, and you seal it off. And you just let those microbes do their thing. And what the microbes do is they all loosen all that oil off, and then whoosh, and then your oil well is recoverable again. Because they go through first. They go through regular, what you consider like put a drill down in. It's like its own pressurized thing, and it comes out, and you can pump it. And then if that doesn't work, there's another way where you can drill into the side at like 45 degrees, or even horizontal drilling, where you can go way deeper and come down at steeper angles. And you could force seawater down in there. And because oil sits on top of water, you can flood a bunch of water in there, and that'll push the oil up. And depends on where your recovery head is, then you can pull more out that way. But once you realize that, damn, there's a lot of caverns in here, and there's a lot of, they're doing a lot of sounding, like, man, there's a huge amount that's stuck in here. But we just, okay, let the water out. We're going to pump the microbes down in there after that. This is the kind of level they're looking at. And they found one of these primary sources. So again, they try to do a 45 degree drilling straight into it. Was the Deepwater Horizon that everybody's heard of, that had that overpressurization event, and nobody could understand why that thing was burning. And even our best technologies, the best firefighting, couldn't put that thing out, because the overpressurization from the abiotic oil primary source was just ridiculously overpressurized. That was the whole thing about it. They were trying to come in on the side of it. Because to go straight into a primary source, that's insanity. Like, the pressures there are tens of thousands of times over what we as humans can even build something to withstand. So they thought, okay, we're going to go 70 miles over here and we're going to drill into it on a horizontal fashion. And it was the longest pipe lay ever for an oil recovery project going into the side of it. And I encourage everybody out there to do and look at what happened with the Deepwater and Horizon and how they were trying to recover oil coming in from 65 to 70 miles away. That's how afraid they were going in close to this thing. And you saw the pressures that came out. It was just, it ignited that thing like a candle. So oil is one thing, abiotic oil theory, and the Russians were all over this. So they're all over the planet, all over their entire territory looking for abiotic oil fields. Because if you drill 30,000 feet down, you're probably going to come into an abiotic source. So all these kind of really, shallow wells at 12,000 feet, something at 6,000 feet or something at 3,000 feet in Saudi Arabia or even less, 1,000 feet down. That's like really very, very, very shallow. But if you're going to get abiotic oil refilling into these wells, you're talking going back down into where limestone gets broken apart chemically. And see, that's the thing. It doesn't have to be oil. The earth is doing the same exact thing. It's recreating and taking these chemicals and remixing them. So it could be hydrocarbons or it could be water, both. So think about where the primary water sources are. If you knew one of those was in Libya, think about it for a second. We're coming into a massive solar cycle here that's going to absolutely dent or scrape or gouge out the ability for us on this planet to grow enough food to feed the human population as it sits at 8 billion people. Like just looking at the cycles, whoever has that information, and many do, including myself, just through research and study and trading of information. And information's a commodity or a currency in itself. Like getting information from one person to another, that is a currency. A lot of people don't look at it as a currency, but information is a currency. Because if you have the next, a bit of information that can fill in where the world's curving to, that's worth a lot of money to people. Where's it going to move to? And see, this is what Ransom talked about earlier was, going down into the Sahel in North Africa. If there's one primary water source, there must be others. Because to put it into perspective here, there's about 200,000 cubic kilometers of water just within 4 nations there. If you're looking at Egypt, and if you go over to Libya, and you come into Tunisia and Morocco, and I would say also Mauritania, and maybe if you went down into Chad, if you did those, it's 5 countries. They're looking at least 200,000 cubic kilometers of water beneath their crust. All right, so if you just drill down in there, and it's continuously refilled from the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. So they got that sweet spot right there. And the rock's real porous. So if they pull it out, it's going to continue to refill indefinitely. Like going into the middle of the grow zone in like Missouri or somewhere in like Kansas, we don't have that like luxury in America. Once we tap our aquifers, and the wells need to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to get that little puddling at the bottom of it. Eventually, they're going to break through a no water zone here very soon where, I'm sorry, we just don't have any more. We drilled to the bottom of it and it's empty now. Africa's never been tapped like this. So with the West African monsoon shifting, and we're looking at massive amounts of rainfall across the Middle East and the Sahel and these areas in the Sudan, and the new Renaissance Dam built in Ethiopia, which is now functional, has been creating hydroelectricity for 2 years, which is 7 years ahead of the schedule of it to fill up. Like somebody knows these cycles are here. And again, to preface this, like the new Renaissance Dam, when it was being surveyed in 2006 and 7, like all the UN projections and everybody doing climate analysis was saying that, all right, this area already, bro, this is one of the driest places on the planet. And through our analysis, it's just going to dry out into people are going to have to leave. And this is going to become an uninhabitable zone. There will be zero water ever, and nothing will grow ever for the rest of our lives through our grandparents' we will be the grandparents, and our grandchildren will never, ever know a drop or a lick of moisture in this area ever for the next 150, 200 years. And this is what they were selling. The United Nations and everybody was selling this premise that this place was going to dry out into like zero water, and everybody's going to leave. Like hundreds, not hundreds of millions, but tens of millions of people are going to have to vacate this zone due to no moisture. And lo and behold, they build the world's, or I shouldn't say the world's, but it was Africa's largest hydroelectric dam. So they put that in the world's driest zone on the planet. Like really, if you went around the world, you might find one or two places that would rival it, but they're pretty much, when they come down to the humidity and thing, they all come to zero. This was one of the world's driest places, but they wanted to put Africa's largest hydroelectric dam there. So in the beginning, people were laughing this off, going, oh, it's a white elephant project. You're building another freeway bypass, kind of jokey things. But it started to rain tremendously. And now it's the largest hydroelectric dam. And they're building 6 more dams down off the highlands from Ethiopia where the Blue and the White Nile meet together. And this is going to be one of the first constantly electrified zones in Africa. And by the way, Port Sudan's there. And you can start to see all the geopolitics. But go back 1,200 years and just across there in Yemen, literally like a 15 or 20-minute flight. It would probably be 15 minutes if you're in an airplane. Over there is the Marib Dam, and that was the largest water body in Arabia circa 800 AD that was responsible for irrigation for all of the frankincense plantations I don't know exactly what they call frankincense plantations, but I would look at that because when they would cut the bark, you get the sap come out, like poppies, you cut the plant and the sap comes out, same, but different. But that water was there to irrigate the frankincense plantations, which were, hundreds of square miles. It was the biggest frankincense growing area on the planet at that time, 800 AD, because they had constant rainfall and they could irrigate those trees at that time. Well, look at it now. It's literally a bone-dry desert where there's nothing that's barely hanging on except like the oldest of the frankincense trees. And these things live to be like incredibly old, 300, 500, 800, 1,000-year-old trees, just like we do with some sequoias and things, but they're frankincense trees. And these were the ones that were way back then. Those are the only ones that had deep enough roots that could survive in today's climate. And then now suddenly, the Middle East has 5 times more rainfall than the average. Like, what's going on there? Somebody knew this climate was going to shift. Somebody knew the new area where it was going to shift to. Now, just walk through me with the mind experiment. Okay, you got all this tons of super new rain coming down all across the driest areas of Africa in the north, including the Sahara Desert. But then below your feet, you have hundreds of thousands of kilometers of cubic kilometers of water, like square miles of water. That's never, ever been touched even once, ever. So put that in perspective. What kind of crops could you grow? The purest water on the planet that's never been contaminated. But now you're going to need to fund that all. So I need a funding mechanism. I need money to put this whole growth thing out here. I need roads. I need railroads. I need pumps. I need a ton of irrigation pipes. I need staff to do it. I need staff housing. I need dehydrators. We're going to need seed stock. We're going to need fertilizer. We're going to need herbicide. We're going to need all these things. But I need a ton of money to do it because this grow zone is going to be larger than all of America and Canada combined. And not only that, but they can turn 2 crops a year because of where it sits with all the sunlight. So you got to think about it. Bigger than all of America and Canada combined. It's actually 13,000 or 13 million square kilometers. Where here in America and Canada combined is somewhere around 11 million. So it's actually larger than all of Canada and all American combined, but you can do a double rotation on that. So it's really, if you're going to do it, say 4 times larger, because we can only do a single rotation on a lot of crops here during the seasons, because of wintertime is where an enormous amount of the grow belt is. Like in that central area, it freezes every winter. You can't grow anything. But in Africa, they'll grow a double rotation. We are getting screwed over here in the Western countries. They're extracting our wealth, and you might call it the BRICS nations. Well, that is nothing more than a conglomeration of a new way to reset the debt system in the new grow zone and steal all the wealth and push it over there. Nothing goes to zero, my friends. Nothing goes to zero. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing goes to zero. It is moved, it is shifted. So if we in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, these Five Eyes nations are bankrupted down to zero, that money will shift. And where's it going to go? It's going to go at all those investment projects, which I just described to you in Africa, which Ransom understands too. He pinged on that thing early. We both understand it. So to put this in perspective, it's just if me and Ransom are chilling on a Thursday night talking about investment projects, starting up a new global economy with a debt-based system, moving over into a double rotation crop, which will turn Africa into the largest grow zone on the planet. And the big experts with the real satellite data and the real cyclical data they were there 50 years ago. And I'll add, maybe one more kind of woo-woo fact, if I could. Somebody knew about these cycles in advance. And if Ransom and I understand this information here, then everybody else out there is being played big, because this is moves on a chessboard. Not everybody is going to be able to survive through this time. The amount of food, unless you're growing it yourself, and the shifts of our climate at the moment. The scariest thing about everything I've just told you is not about our present way of life declining in America and we're going to go into hyperinflation. That's nothing. That's child's play. Everything that at least I have read since the inception of this grow zone being set up in the Sahel in North Africa is everything else in the entire world is going to go. They don't want you to grow any more food. There'll be no more grow zones across the world anymore, except select ones in like Australia. There'll be a few select ones that are still viable in China. There might be pretty much Canada, write it off. And I will say it's pretty much going to go to zero. So they're looking at sort of mid-latitude, what we understand is like Missouri and Oklahoma and this sort of thing in America as our central grow zone will still be viable. In California, to a point, it would be massive crop loss. It would be way 50% reduced to what we get yields now. What the whole plan was with this new African grow zone is to control it as the centralized distribution for the world's grain supply. And when I say that, I hope that scared you, because if it didn't scare you, I didn't explain it enough. So let me explain this here. They're going to grow the food, and they're going to distribute it to the rest of the world. So it's going to be grown in Africa and all your other places where they're going to tell you you can't grow it because of nitrogen, or you can't grow it because of CO2. You have to shut your farming here, there, and everywhere, like they're doing in Japan, and they're doing in England, they're starting to do in America, and they're doing everywhere. They're going to shut down farming completely across the world as much as they can, except for the very, very, very base of it that still can provide just enough barely for the local countries that have big grow zones, but the rest of the world is going to be reliant on a single distribution point of where they grow it, and they're going to ship it around the world. Think of it as like the world's largest Amazon facilitation center. They're going to grow all the grains. They're going to grow corn, sorghum, barley. They're going to grow the wheat, and everything is all going to originate in Africa and Sahel area, the North African area. But then it's going to be distributed across the planet. That's the scariest thing. They're going to try to control the food supply down to a single point source of where it's grown and who controls that whole growing area. Obviously, it's the same one. It's going to be BlackRock. It's going to be Vanguard. It's going to be the same companies, Halliburton. They're the same ones that have all the metal technologies and the piping that can go through. Like, there's very, very few companies that can get enough infrastructure out there to push this much new area over millions of square kilometers of grow zone. There's only going to be a few big players involved in this revamping of Africa. And once the food's grown there, it will be put on ships with new harbors and new ports and everything, and it'll be sent across the world. But then where it arrives over in some places in South America that's outside of Argentina or Brazil. Imagine the cost in that. And imagine if your country doesn't comply to whatever the superpowers say. This is where the world's going to. This shift is for real. This whole reset is not about, they just want to do a thing for happy people. It's because the electromagnetic field's changing. The ability for us to grow food is known between certain zones. A lot are going to go offline or be greatly reduced. The perfect opportunity arises because they know the hydrological cycle is going to revamp itself, and the Sahel in North Africa is going to become green again. Well, they'll just take advantage of that. By the way, we can only have one grow zone on the planet. You ruin the planet. There's microplastics, there's CO2, there's nitrogen. You know what? Let's just all consolidate the entire world's food growing in one place so we don't pollute the planet again. We'll guarantee you food deliveries every year. But we can't pollute the planet anymore, you bad humans, so let's do it, right? Yay, let's do it. You can maybe have your garden with taxes every year like you do property tax. They'll all absolutely have to be inspected. If you're not spraying glyphosate, it won't be allowed. But they are going to consolidate the world's food growing into a single location controlled by the single megacorps that will then deliver to you. But if your social credit score or you deviate even 1/5 of 1/8 of a centimeter off of what the narratives are, they will cut your food supply off. At that point, you have no food supply because you're not producing anything locally. You're reliant on the grow zone in Africa to provide all your foods because it'll be smooth and well-oiled in the beginning. And I don't know, Ransom, maybe that's the direction you were taking. And I know it was a long-winded answer. I spoke for 20, but man, it is that deep of a topic that needs to be really, really, really discussed, hashed out, and spread this information.
There does seem to be some kind of problem with the grow zones. Let's think about South America. What's going on in Brazil? You know what I mean? They're gone full-blown communists just about. They're arresting people for thoughts and crimes. It's just like in Europe now or the UK. So where's that going to go when you have people that will arrest people for speaking? What do you think they'll do when they have power of the food supply of basically South America? I mean, think about that. And then when you zoom up here, I was showing everybody Google Earth satellite images of the Southwest, West Texas, Eastern New Mexico. And just easily from space, you can see that there's like a virus that's across that. Now, that's a sensitive topic depending on what you believe in. We need power. We have power. We have resources in the ground. We have coal, natural gas. There's a lot of fracking going on. But the question is why do they frack literally on the best parts of the aquifer in North America? Now, if you've been keeping track of the aquifer in North America, it's low. But on top of that, there's grow zones, right, that grow right over it. But in between each grow zone is a swath of large amount of acreage that is fracking. So you have the fracking mixed in with your GMO crops, and this is the food that's going to your tables. And then when you think about South America, Brazil, they're famous for spraying all kinds of stuff on their crops. Right, but they are one of the biggest rancher farm producing nations in South America. And then you have Mexico. If you pay attention to the Mexican politics, well, you would know that they're most likely going to be a failed state soon, going towards the route of communism as well. But on top of that, having a super problem with crime as far as many cartels exist and operate in their country and have sway on their government. Now, in the United States, we're getting to see the first signs, just like we told you for the last couple of years, that things are going in this weird direction, where there's gangs taking over hotels, gangs taking over apartment complexes, all of the same things we see in Europe in the last decade, we're now seeing here. So we're going down that same path along with the regulation, and you'll see it start coming out. So, You know, I know they tell you every 4 years that this is the last and best election almost. And I think that is true. Every 4 years, it's a constant battle to get which criminals you want in there that'll do you right while things fall apart.
And please remember, head over to civilizationcycle.com and you're going to get our show notes. I try to put those out every week. So the same idea as Ransom and I are talking about tonight, if you can't remember everything or absorb it, we're going to put that into bullet point fashion for you. Just a couple quick notes there. So come on over, put your email in. It's just, us controlling your information. We don't sell it. We don't try to do anything. It's just so we can send you the information that we think is pertinent so you can start the conversation, because it's going to take all of us and a huge amount of solutions to come through these problems. And that's really the purpose of me putting out the show notes every week is, here's what we talked about. Now, can you talk with others about it? And maybe we can all find some solutions. So just enter your email in there, put your name, enter your email, and I will get that out to you on a weekly.
Our premium beef cubes are sous vide, freeze-dried, and ready to be eaten right now, or in a decade from now. We want you to eat our beef now so you can buy more. Prep with steaks, not with beef crumbles. This is a high-quality product. It's all American beef and 100% natural. None of that craziness of lab-grown meat and mRNA jabs. Our beef has a shelf life of 10+ years. This is high-quality cooked and freeze-dried beef for long-term storage or not. Eat well today and eat well tomorrow. Click the link in the description to get your Prepper beef with Prepper All Naturals, so you will always know what's for dinner.
If you're gearing up for emergency preparedness or camping, the Kelly Kettle is the most valuable piece of equipment you can own. Your Kelly Kettle can boil 1 liter of water in just a few minutes using natural fuel. Your kettle will allow you to quickly purify water for drinking, rehydrate food, or simply cook a meal. Whether you're a backpacker, fisherman, hunter, or emergency prepper, after one use, you'll know that the Kelly Kettle's a must. The specific design of the kettle allows you to start the fire and keep it burning in windy or rainy conditions. It's so easy to boil water and cook food all at the same time. The Kelly Kettle provides the ability to stay warm on a cold night, feed yourself properly with a variety of foods, stay hydrated, stay clean, and stay alive. The Kelly Kettle is simple to use with only 2 main pieces, the kettle and the fire base. Gather a small amount of natural fuel, fill the kettle with water, fill the fire base with any flammable material, place the kettle on the fire base, start a fire in the fire base, adding additional twigs and pine cones, etc. into the chimney. In a matter of minutes, you'll have boiling water for a hot drink or to hydrate food. Add a cook set and get breakfast going. The kettle does it all at the same time. The Kelly Kettle comes in 3 sizes: Trekker, small; Scout, medium; Base Camp, large. Each one available in aluminum or stainless steel. The variety of sizes means that there's a Kelly Kettle stove out there for everyone. Your Kelly Kettle is great in an emergency situation or just to have a hot drink on a camping trip. Purchase your Kelly Kettle today. Dependability, reliability, the ability, boil water, cook fast, and survive. Kelly Kettle, outdoor life enjoyed.
Pro Clear Cleanse is the most powerful spray cleaner on the market today. No elbow grease necessary. Pro Clear Cleanse cuts through grease and grime like a chef's knife. Finally, the one cleaner that can do it all. Powerful surfactant cleaning technology cleans ovens, glass, porcelain, even polished wood. Environmentally friendly, less packaging and waste with no harsh smells, pet safe, child safe. 5 tablets equals 1 bottle of traditional cleaner. It's 5 months of cleaning for a fraction of the cost. Behold the grease-erasing power of Odor Crush. Simply drop a tablet into your bottle of warm water and shake it so it is evenly diluted. Spray the surface you want cleaned. Let set longer for tougher grease. Take a paper towel or a reusable cloth and wipe. Done and done. One of the best things about Pro Clear Cleanse, it's you can take it anywhere. Hiking, camping, or on vacation. Without having to buy or bring cleaner, you can store the same potential in the tablets. Then just add water and bam, you have a bottle of cleaner. Order now and make life a little easier and cleaner.
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the progenitors of great civilizations, or if they knew when their empires would fall and disappear into history. Fortunately for us as modern man, we can recognize that we are at the precipice, a point in history where we can see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us.
Building a bigger team out so we can, get this message out. How do we get the message out together? That's the whole thing. Because, Ransom and I are sitting here talking about, but how do we get this out so people can implement it in their lives, and not just solutions, but, we try to describe the problem and we do talk about solutions during the show. But then how do you bring others into the conversation too? Because the world's, you're looking at the world, everybody just thinks, like, oh, something's wrong right now. It's spinning off balance. But again, it's such a good thing to look at those who have achieved so much greater things like 50x or 100x above where you are right now, and look at them and say, well, how did they keep their focus to continue to drive through all the, things that are smashing from you at light speed that are trying to push you back from following your goals, getting to your dreams, getting those aspirations, and then making a difference in life to help humanity. Some people have asked me, like, why do you spend your time on all this thing? Couldn't you do something else? You can make money. You do that. Yeah, well, I think that it's beyond a life goal. It's a mission for me. And I don't even feel like work half the time. I'm just sitting here, even less than half the. It's a joy for me to do the research because I love using my mind and connecting these dots. For me, it's not work. That's the whole thing. Maybe if I wake up someday and I'm sick or I don't feel that good, I'm like, okay, I got to do this today. That's different. But on an average day, I love to get up. I'm excited when I get up. Like, what can I do today to try to bring people together to get this message out so we can all have a better chance at survival? Because if you're listening to this word and Ransom and I talk, you're the kind of people I really want you to be my neighbors, and I want you to be in the new world and develop the new world with me, because what I see outside in the periphery, most of that I don't jive with. I don't want that around me, that resonant frequency. I don't want that in my field. But those of you that want to have these discussions and bring up these conversations, I do want you in my field. I want you in my harmonic. How do we make this world a better place? That's the whole thing. And Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk about this uninterrupted, uncensored, like many other platforms are. And if you consider free speech something of value, head over to revolution.radio. Donate tabs right at the top there in the nav bar. As many ways as you can have conversations, as many ways as you can help support keeping the channel on air. I really believe this is going to be one of the last venues that'll have actually spoken word until we move to ham radio, or we have to do something else like this to be able to broadcast. Ham radio, remember, it's got to be a conversation. It can't be a broadcast with advertising. So if it does come down to that, and it finally, tips over somewhere, I'm absolutely going to be on a repeater with Ransom this same time, 10 p.m. to midnight, and we will have this conversation, but he and I are limited to 2-minute responses or under. It's going to take on a whole new context of the show at that point, but we will give you the frequencies which we will broadcast to on Thursday nights, 10 p.m. if we come down and need a ham network. If it comes to that, you're going to have to deep dive into your soul and start to ask yourself if this idea of statism, the biggest lie ever given to humanity is called statism, like you belong to a country. This is the biggest lie ever sold to anybody beyond taxes. I mean, taxes is child play. Statism is the biggest fiction ever sold to humanity, that you're part of this nation. So that's what they did. They divided humanity right away by putting lines on the globe. So if you feel that you're going to stay and fight for something that's a piece of flag with a fictitious line on the globe, that you're not going to bail out and continue to stay alive because of something that you've been taught through your whole lifetime that it exists as this, that, or the other. Just look through history. You're expendable beyond all belief. You are just a peon that's expendable, and there's no people wouldn't even miss you. That's the whole point of it. You're nothing but a slave. You're a slave to be plugged in. That's what Ransom was talking about before in the first hour here was, starving the slaves. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. Are you kidding me? And you're supposed to stay back and defend this. And that's the whole biggest thing is, I've had this conversation before. They're like, you're not going to stay in America? And I'm like, yeah, I probably will. I mean, I'll defend my property and thing. But if it gets too crazy and you got armies running all over the place, I'm going to bail. I'm not going to sit and just get knocked down with some sort of ordinance coming in because I got airplanes and helicopters above me. Of course, I'm going to get out of here. Get off to a different location. Well, don't you care about your country? And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait a second. Hold on. Now them's fighting words right there, bro. You're telling me that you want me to defend the very way of life that has enslaved everybody on this planet, that I'm supposed to be continuously fighting for that enslavement mechanism to continue, because I would bail on that I'm the bad guy because I don't want to continue to fight for the same mechanism that's enslaving everybody on the planet, specifically within your own nations? Like, that's what, I just kind of shake my head and go, you don't even get it. You're so far. You don't even understand the idea of statism and the lie that's been sold to us on this planet that we're by nations. They have divided humanity. We are humans. We are human beings. There's no other thing. There's no states. There's no countries. We are humanity. And see, that's the whole thing is, once they realized that they could divide you by the nation, that they could get people to fight. Because if all humanity comes together, then these elitists, these parasites, these energetic parasites that have been here that inhabit this dark energy vibration frequency are the very lowest of those vibratory fields that can exist on our planet. Because you can only go so deep into the vibratory pattern where it just kind of stops. You can't go any lower, right? I was thinking about hate and animosity and this whole, when you get down to that, anger and the whole really deep, there's a point where you just can't go any lower. The human resonance can go really high up into pure love, or it can go down into pure darkness. And at some point it bottoms out. And it seems that the world's being pushed into the bottoming out phase by the economy, those people over there. Hey, don't let that dude steal your cookie while the bankers have 100 cookies on their plate. Hey, don't let that one guy over there steal your one cookie off your plate when the banker's holding 100 cookies over here. Hey, don't let him steal your cookie. This kind of thing. But I sit here and I look at this and go, statism is the biggest ridiculousness ever sold to humanity. And see, this is how they come apart from everybody. It's they want you to defend the system that enslaves you. But at the same time, once you break through that and you go, wait, you just enslaved us by putting lines on a map. What if we all came together as humanity? I don't know, man. Ransom, you might delve into that thought because I know you've had it a few times yourself. This statism thing is the largest fraud ever put on humanity in the last 5,000 years, easily. That there are nations, that we are not one united human race on this planet.
Well, they do want it that way. They want one united government. It's just not the ideal one that we're thinking of. Where you have a worldwide free society. That's just not the plan. So the nation states are over, or at least that's the plan, to get rid of them so that they could form new conglomerations or conglomerates of some kind. But it's becoming obvious that there's a designed attack on the way of life that people enjoy now. I put up this article right here that's talking about 126 nations meet to discuss ditching the U.S. dollar, as well as the World Economic Forum like agendas. But this is up on the upper level. And then when you get up there and you start thinking about who are the people that run things and get to decide things for everybody, you get into that statism, and they can never be bad, whether it's a cop doing a bad shoot on the street, or maybe NASA bumping a moon out of orbit on accident. NASA's asteroid smashing mission has permanently knocked a moon out of its orbit, and I'm sure without reading it, they'll say, "Don't worry, there's no threat to you." And that's the same thing they were telling people in Chernobyl in 1986. Don't worry about it. I know there's a glowing beam of ionizing radiation, making the smoke glow, but you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And they're telling people here, I guess, where we live, which is 7 miles away from this report about wildlife at Holloman Air Force Base having high levels of chemical contaminants, according to their study. And Alamogordo is like literally 6 to 7 miles away, and most likely uses the same underground aquifer for some of it and some of the runoff from the mountains. So anything that probably they have next door to us, we also have. And they're talking about all kinds of problems with the wildlife, the birds, the animals, all the stuff that is getting contaminated. But they don't mention people. But don't worry about that. So we're getting to deal with everything in a row from all different angles. Armed Venezuelans that occupy entire complexes in Colorado. I'm sure that they'll shut this down pretty fast, but this is becoming a trend everywhere. Matter of fact, that's the trend for Europe, was to have massive amounts of people move in, and then of course they make their own little organizations, and then some organizations get the nod to be able to operate, and others don't. And then
so Ransom, could I say something real quick with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, me and a buddy sat down for a minute and we're like, all right, if that was going to happen in this house right now, like, where are our positions? Like, once they knocked on that door and they would open that door, none of them would have left. They would have, because we were looking at that, like, what positions do you take up and how do you defend that when they come in with that small of a force of 5 guys, but you also have a way to defend yourself. So we were looking at that, like, where are your lines of sight, like, where would you have sat when they opened the door, like, what corners would you have taken, would you have been on the floor, like, which positions would you have taken up at that time? So I'll just leave it there.
Well, I would say that if someone was ready for this to happen and they were that type of person, it would have to go head to head immediately when the very first time it happened. The very first time these guys come to your door, and they've kicked out the managers that run the building, and the police don't do nothing. They're giving them squatters' rights despite being organized crime. But they're only one group of many different groups that are setting up in the U.S. to make it like the UK. And you could do that, but the problem with that is next time you have a mob at your house, because little SA has a cousin, and they're affiliated, so to speak. So they're affiliated with 100,000 people in various places, and when you make yourself a target whenever you fight back, that's the problem. And not only from them, from your own government, of course, because then they charge people with crimes who would do the right thing. And obviously, in my opinion, the right thing would be for about 10 or 15 people, if the local law enforcement isn't going to crack down on it and take care of it. 10 or 15 people. I'm not advising anybody to do anything, of course, because you can't do that in this world. But if it were me and 10 other like-minded people, you would have to confront them immediately and show them that this ain't like where you came from. You're not doing that here. We're not going to handle it. That's not working out too good for people in France, for people in Spain, for people in Greece, for people in the UK, Ireland, England. They're not having such luck like that. But one thing is different from here to there is their choices were already limited, a while back. So they don't have the same choices we have. The problem is that it's openly happening. And people predicted it for years that kind of thing was going to happen, that if you leave a border open, then you don't have a country. If you're dealing out, and I'm sure you saw California has now agreed to pay, the digital soup kitchen wages for every illegal that is there or undocumented person that's there. Now, I have a big heart, and I feel bad for people in a bad spot. But the problem is after a while, you have to stop helping people that chose to put themselves in that position. So when I go to Walmart and I see the people out there selling water, they're across the street from the homeless people just asking for money for nothing. I could say at least they're offering water. The problem is I could go in Walmart and buy that same case for like $2 that they're trying to get for the one bottle. Why are they here? They put themselves in that position. And, it's not everyone else's fault, but the government that you live in is going to make it your problem and make it your fault. And they're talking about building millions of new public housing units across the United States. And every single time, whether it's in Europe or in Russia or wherever it's at, when you build these things, it turns into hellholes. And if the state runs it, it turns into even more of a hellhole. And anybody that's ever lived in housing projects in the United States knows that's been true here for quite some time. But now the government is deciding, you know what, we won't keep it in the housing projects. We're going to put everybody up in this nice apartment complex that other people live in. And in Europe, they're even telling people that they get priority over the citizens of whichever country it is. We're going in that exact same direction, and there's no other kind of word to put on it besides Marxism, socialism, or communist, but they all come from the same tree of knowledge or tree of thought there. They all branch off from that same tree of thought, and that is, it doesn't matter what you have, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everybody in this utopic idea that, we see the utopia never works out. Every single time people starve. So when you're looking across the U.S. and you're seeing, oh, that meat packing plant burned down. Oh, that chicken plant burned down. Oh, everybody's having problems with diseases everywhere. Oh, and look, there's millions and millions of more people to compete with for everything. Now, some good news kind of out there is that according to one of these articles I was showing here, Generation Z has decided, maybe college isn't the direction for us. Maybe we should just skip right to the blue collar trade, schools and learn how to do something. And that's exactly what we were talking about last week. So there is a fad of that. So that's a little bit of, good news. But the question is where do they all work when things get shut down and your economy is purposely getting shut down? And they are doing the same playbook as they did in Europe. You could just look at any country in Eastern Europe and you can see the plan for the United States. It's a classic Cloward and Piven strategy. The problem is I think Americans don't realize that we use a electoral college to, pick our leader, the president. And although illegal or people that are non-citizens cannot vote as it is, it doesn't matter because they've never used the popular vote for anything ever. It's always been the electoral college. And guess what happens when you move in millions of people into a city? Well, the demographics change, the population changes, the narrative changes, and the distribution of what resources there are also changes to meet the needs of the new millions of people. Now, whenever they redistrict everything to find out how many electoral votes each area gets, everyone may be upset to find out that certain left-leaning cities around the United States now have millions of more people to represent in the electoral college. So that means there's more electoral votes in those areas to go to pick whoever it is. And I think people do not realize that. It doesn't matter if there's a direct vote. It's population-based in the electoral college. So each city is going to pick that out. And they're thinking, oh, well, that's the left side of things. But if you really look at it without a tinted, kind of bias to it, you remember that the Texas governor was busing hundreds of thousands of people to leftist cities. So in effect, enabling more of the population to grow in those areas that are supposedly an alternative voting style, but the right was helping the left. And so you got to see the pattern as it goes. And what they're doing is destroying the form of government in each and every nation state so that they can do a broad brush censorship of any ideas. And think about this. We sit here and talk about different foods. You were talking about an additive before. What happens when you can't even say that without going to jail? We've gone from in the past where there was, radio that people could talk on, and then they said, hey, you can't say all that. And matter of fact, even though more people want to listen to you, you have to have the other side of it, which less people want to listen to, judging by supply and demand. So they said, no, that's not fair. You have to hear both sides. And then it went to, no, you can only hear our side of it. And, people fought back with memes and jokes and sarcasm that kind of beat the censorship. But even now, we live in a country in the free United States where a man went to jail for a meme. And, we're laughing at those people in the UK going to jail for their ideas. Well, we're not far behind that. We're like just a couple of edicts in the government away, and you have people openly talking about changing the Constitution and the way it fundamentally works for different reasons. Maybe you want to allow a president whose parents weren't born here, according to the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. They can now take office. Other things like maybe freedom of speech isn't free. It's only free to say what we want you to say, and that's the only thing that you can say. Otherwise, you go to jail. And they're doing this. They're wanting to rewrite the whole thing in a more equal, push. It's a more socialist idea where everybody's fair under the state. The problem is it's two-tiered, and it's designed to destroy all of the positive aspects of every country. So what do we do if all the countries start clamming up from World War II, or World War III, excuse me, and, then products aren't being shipped to other countries? That means countries aren't making the money. They're also going to hoard what they have. And every country now doesn't make enough to feed themselves. And then you were also talking about the aquifers. I mentioned how polluted kind of our aquifer is here with industrial drilling and different stuff. And I'm not arguing one way, or I'm just noticing that that's true. But when you go down to South America, you realize that the South Americans don't really own their aquifers. Matter of fact, back in the early 2000s, the Bush family and others were buying up rights to the water. Why were they doing that if there's no problem down there now? Well, they're doing it for some plan in the future. And then in the United States, I think you have T. Boone Pickens and a couple of other people that mainly own almost all of the water rights to the aquifers and the railroads and access to the Great Lakes. And they make deals with other countries that don't benefit this one. So you're having this done in every country in the world except for China and Russia and people that are on the other side of it. So I'm trying to figure out, are we the baddies? Did we somehow convert, change positions with the axis of evil so that now we're the ones that, not us specifically, but the Western alliance of powers that is pushing everything that is opposite from individual or free rights of any kind? They're pooping on the Magna Carta. They're getting rid of the constitutions. Even if the laws say something, they'll do something else with their courts. And we're seeing this everywhere, from Brazil to the United States to, Western Europe. So what is this all designed to do? Well, it seems like every aspect of it seems to be to shut down civilization, trade, and the ability for each individual or family or community to feed themselves and actually have the power over the land that's around them locally. So where we go from here, I don't know. It seems like everywhere needs to have more control on their local governments, and that way these bigger communist conglomerates can't work properly. Because I don't want to live in Venezuela. I don't want to live where, I might get in trouble for something I tweeted 20 years ago or something, when I'm an old man. I'm looking over there in the UK, and they're just, raiding people at night that said something on one of the social medias. while the actual criminals that murder, rape, steal, they get probation. Don't worry about them. They didn't know any better.
You're describing a new control system and a new magnetic field state for our solar system, i.e., on our planet Earth. So think about cycles of magnetism, electromagnetism. The way you perceive reality, the way your brain actually interprets information is electromagnetically driven. Like if you don't have a magnetic field, your brain will stop. Literally will stop. Like if I put you into a controlled environment where I can turn down or turn up the electromagnetic field intensity, which they've done some macabre experiments through, since the 1940s in the very rudimentary form to where we sit today, where it's wired out and AI is analyzing your responses to, 1/1 millionth of a nanotesla change in the magnetic field state. We are moving into a new era of time. And when I say that, that's no just generalization. We are shifting into a more energetic area of space as our sun drags our solar system through a new energetic area of space. It's much more energetic. The temperatures are warmer. There's more plasma density. Everything is just different of this area of space for the next 1,000+ years, 2,000 years that we're going to enter and spin through. They might call it a zodiac sign, something called Aquarius. But there's an intersection of an electrical current in space as we transit through this. Like Birkeland currents, generally it's energetic flows, as we consider like a high voltage cable between stars themselves that are connected along lines, and more generally along the spiral arm of our galaxy that's its own energetics. But within that, there's much more intense, shall we say, wrapped field currents, field aligned currents, where these, think of it like a DNA strand. That's the most interesting thing for me I've ever learned about this whole, electric universe, and looking at plasma and electricity and how electrons vibrate back and forth and thing. DNA and electricity, plasma currents are exactly the same. Like the way your DNA spins on itself is the way that electrical ropes form on themselves too. Like if you were to splice those two out and put them next to each other, they would look exactly identical. That's what's the craziest thing, is your DNA helix is the exact same thing as a plasma helix or a field aligned current wrapping on itself helix. Those are both the same. So you got to understand that it would affect us on that level, but at the same time, the perceptional level. So we're coming into a time where if you're following these cycles, our sun is changing in its intensity. And here's the crazy thing too, Ransom. I don't know if we discussed this last week or not, but over I'm going to say these last 3 to 4 weeks, there has been an enormous, like I've never seen this type of thing of just people coming out, like thousands, and then thousands of videos of people that are over 50 talking about how white the sun is now and how intense it is. Like they'll be super comfortable in the shade, but as soon as they walk out in the sun, they're like, I feel like I got scalded like in a microwave oven or something, or some kind of heat lamps on me. I'm not talking like 5 or 10 people. I'm really talking thousands and thousands. And it's, for some reason, over the last month, has this been an anomaly of, I've never heard this before. I search a lot of social media. I see a lot of like trends and things, new monikers and, tag words and things like, I search those best tag words to load videos and things. So I'm always looking for information like this. And this white sun is a new thing. It is literally a new thing out of nowhere, where people are describing their experiences of them understanding and knowing as a kid, the sun was yellow, it was orange, it was soft, it was kind, it was comfortable. And it's turned so white, just ridiculous UV coming in and like burning when you put your skin out there outside the shade, and the color of it. Well, that goes hand in hand, exactly what we're talking about, a new magnetic field state. Okay, so you mentioned Magna Carta. So if we come back to Magna Carta and you're thinking, okay, 1400s ish, what had occurred at that time? Not only Magna Carta, but if you march forward in time, what do we come into? Well, we come into the Steam Revolution. And then the Industrial Revolution directly after that, Scientific Revolution. You're supposed to tell me that we were in a dark ages for like 800 years or so, according to traditional history. We sat in the dark ages. We didn't invent a single thing for 800 years. So look at this is the funniest thing. I really do laugh. Okay, so look at our modern world. So it's 1940 to now. That's only been like 70 years or so, 80 years, depending on where you want to start marking World War II beginning or end of it. Okay, I'll give you 80 years. But look how much stuff we've invented in 80 years. Like absurd amounts of technology in 80 years. Yet they're telling us in the period of the Dark Ages for 800, 10 times longer, that humanity invented nothing, zero, no movement forward at all, zero. And you're supposed to believe that. So put that in context. The last 80 years, what we've invented, and then they want to tell you something that's 10 times longer that we didn't even invent a single thing during that time. Okay, but after that time had finished, we suddenly come into Magna Carta when you're signing this about, what do you consider the rights of a life on this planet given by God as a sentient born being. And then instantly it's like Steam Revolution, Industrial Revolution, Computer Revolution, and then boom, we're here. Okay, well, that was a different phase state. That was the apex of where we are now. We're starting to spin off of that. So there's going to be a couple things that'll happen with this. Humanity's awareness of the governance system upon them, on how our world is governed with, like you say, presidents or armies or, senators, or give their mayors. I don't care what it is, that the way this world is governed, this planet, this farm, I'm really going to call it a farm Earth here. There's no other. When you really look at it, it's a farm. It's a farm to tweak human energies to be harvested. And I'm going to just leave it there. I'm not going to go too deep on that. But the way that we have been ruled since the late 1940s is very, 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 very different than where we were in the 1920s, the shift. Like that whole shift of the world prior to that was the czars and the kingdoms and that sort of thing. And you knew it was at its end, and it shifted and it turned into what we know now as countries. And that whole shift from 1920 has lasted at least 100 years, and now we're into a new shift. Because if you really do a lot of study prior to 1920, we're going back into the Ottoman Empire. You're going back in. Take a look at the maps of prior ages, even in the early 1800s. Go to like an 1805 map of Europe, and look at what is there. It's just a conglomeration of like 6 or 7 entities that controlled Europe. And then 100 and some years later, then that's suddenly broken up and we have, 50 countries there. Like, what was that all about? That you talk about a great reset. That was a great reset as well. Like these resets occur at every single juncture, I would say at around 100 years, 80 to 100 years, they shift. There's a new governance system come in. But all I'm saying is that they're following the trend of electromagnetic changes that are ongoing and never ending, because the only constant is change. And if you understand that reference, I'm glad you do, because the only thing that's constant is everything's always changing. That's the only thing that's certain, is everything's always changing. So if you look at it in an electromagnetic sense, think about if we go back to the Greek and Roman Empire, like how things were able to be gotten away with. And I would say the same thing with the church as well. If you come into, when the church was at its strongest, and you would say probably like 1300 AD to 1450, somewhere. That was kind of the apex of the power of the church at the time. Some would disagree and say it, lasted deeply into the 1600s. But that governance system of burning people and just wiping out entire civilizations and all people on some country or era or peninsula that didn't agree with your thing, like that was okay back then. But today you just cannot in any way get away with that. Are they the governance systems of what's acceptable or not acceptable change with the magnetic field change? So that what we're experiencing today really is nothing more, just validates what I've been doing with all my research. So the change in governance validates there's a change in an electromagnetic field right now. Like the sun's behaving strangely, so it's changing the electromagnetic field on our Earth. The North Pole is in its polar wander, and the South Pole is wandering as well, even more now this year. So it just backs that up. Like, why is there so much movement of pushing and forcing a society into a new direction? Well, they have to, out of survival for themselves. And when I talk about, I say the elites and the governance structure, it has to force the people to move. Because in a new electromagnetic field state, you're interpreting the world around you differently. Like you literally see through the demons. You see through the veil of deception and lies because your frequency is changing. Your vibratory frequency is going faster and faster, yet the old system is really heavy and very iron-like, where you're becoming more like a dragonfly, going above that. And a lot of people are waking up and seeing the ridiculousness of it all. They're like, how's this even possible anymore? That's because the old governance structure was set in a different magnetic field state when people were resonating in that same control system that was set up. So you think, cryptocurrencies are just somehow happenstance of today. Nope, it's going to be a faster frequency, faster money. The same thing, this control, digital ID. Well, why do we need a digital ID? Don't I have a plastic thing with a little star on it that I finally had to get so I could get on an airplane? I thought the little plastic thing was okay. No, not anymore. No, that's a dense thing. That's too dense. The frequency we're moving into is fast. That's why we need digitization. Instantization, if that's even a word, like instant manifestation. Instant recognition, instant everything. That's why everything is being digitized and moving into this, quote, digital world, digital IDs, smart contracts, little cryptocurrency, this thing that needs to be identifiable, biometrics. That's an instant identifier. Everything is instant because the frequency field is changing to a faster vibration. So governments are trying to front run it, but I really, really, really believe that this cycle is very different. They're trying their best to stay in power, but they understand the frequency is running away so fast that generally I'm going to say I would say my demarcations in time are like you with Ransom. It's like around 535 AD. There was a speed up. That's why all the volcanoes went off at the same time. Like the Earth's frequency or electromagnetic field had changed drastically around 535. And interestingly, that's the end of the Roman Empire. So when the Roman Empire really got, after the Greeks, let's say 400 BC, like that magnetic field state of our planet allowed that governance system of the Greeks transferred to the Romans. Into that era of, say, a good 800 years, the frequency field held. So that governance system held state so people could be controlled at that time. But that governance system created in a field that still kind of equalized in resonance. But as the sun would change and we got these massive volcanic eruption, 535, something changed with the frequency. That's what caused all of these volcanoes to go off, just like we're seeing today. If you're looking at correlations and causations and, I guess, equivalents, like the amount of volcanoes going off today, we're getting borderline very close to, you're not going to want to breathe the air in the next year or so. It's going to be so acidic unless you're closer to the equator. Like when we get to this types of loops in time, at the very same time that the Roman Empire was finally in full collapse and absolutely ended, was the 535 AD when the volcanic eruptions occurred. Well, for me, that's just a tweak in the field. And then a new governance structure had to come up. But see, They couldn't control humanity. That's what the Dark Ages is. The frequency field changed so fast from 535 AD that governorship or kings or queens, whatever you like to call them, elite, they couldn't like adjust to the field as fast as it was changing for the humanity on the planet at that time to control them, until it came into sort of some stabilization again, somewhere around like say 1100 AD. And that's what we're experiencing right now. That's why everything's in flux, because the field's changing so fast again that they can't find their equilibrium to control anymore, because there's no stabilization. It's going to run away because we've just shifted ages again. We're coming into a very fast, very dense, fast, fiery, way heated, plasma dense, debris dense region of space right now, like literally right now. As you're seeing these giant fireballs roll through the skies, they're just going to continue to amplify to the point where you're going to see fireballs in the day. You're going to see breaking up fireballs, like, shockwave kind of stuff daily coming up as we move through this next year. Like, that's kind of hard to control for governance, structure. I don't care if it's kings, queens, central banks. I don't care what it is. Monarchies, emperors, whatever. They can't control the humanity's perception of it. And I will be boldly stating that 535 frequency shifted. It was running away so fast that there could be no established structure for humanity to be governed by at that time, until there was some stabilization from the sun back onto our Earth's magnetic field, where it stabilized somewhere, I'm going to say right around the year 1000.
There was a lot of material in the air, and no sound, guys. Do we not have sound?
We do. I hear you loud and clear.
Somebody said there is no sound, and I don't see it. So hold on. Let me check that out.
And as you do that, I will tell about 535 AD. So 535 AD, apparently in the last 1500 years, they say it was the worst year to be alive. And the reason was, according to Ashfall, as Ransom was just referencing, there were 2 VEI 8 eruptions and 1 VEI 7, because they can see kind of the density of ash layering. So they know there's 1 deviation down on the ash layering. So there was 2 VEI 8s, like 2 year without a summers, and then 1 that was barely below a year without a summer, all in congruence at the same time, which decimated food production for like 10 years on the planet. Can you imagine not just 1 volcano that created the year without a summer, but 2 of those, and then the third, which was a little bit light version of that, all occurring in the same year? the air was so toxic with the sulfur dioxide around, let's say, like Greece and Italy and that sort of latitude, that people couldn't even breathe anymore. They were suffocating and drowning from the sulfuric acid in their throats. That's the kind of craziness that occurred at that time. So what was the frequency change? And I would say vibration includes in this, not just frequency. It's vibration and sound. If you want to create reality and matter, you have to have all three. You got to have frequency, vibration, and vibration then turned into sound waves themselves, or waves of resonance. So frequency and vibration. So what changed to the point where the crust was stable and suddenly the crust was no longer stable? To the point where it popped off all these massive eruptions at the same time. Like we're seeing the exact same thing happening here. Look at the amount of volcanoes right now. There's 43 erupting volcanoes on our planet right now. That's more. The record in the last, at least since I've been doing my channel, the most I'd ever seen was 38 erupting volcanoes. And now there's 42. So it kind of comes down to the same thing. Like there's something happen electromagnetically on the planet here, where our crust is starting to adjust. So the pressurization from beneath is starting to crack open. And I will say one last thing. I don't know if we have sound back, but if y'all are up in the Pacific Northwest, the Cascadia Range, when we come into one of these events, at least three of the volcanoes on the range go off at the same time. Just saying. Not, this is peer-reviewed research. I'm just saying, of those 7 volcanoes up there, 3 erupt simultaneously out of the 7 that are on the range there. So I'll leave it there.
That would just be no good, man. Yeah, evidently.
No, it wouldn't, especially if you're in Idaho, especially the prevailing winds blowing that way. You just don't want to be there.
Right. I've always thought that that's the most, in my opinion, underrated area that's just waiting to be wiped off the map is the the West Coast. You have all those major cities right there next to a giant fault line, and also, the volcanoes nearby. So any number of things right there could just devastate the area. And in fact, we know that it has in the past, like giant tsunamis coming off the coast from the Cascadian subduction zone there. That would be horrible. I brought this up before, but it does kind of make you wonder, why is it that all of civilization seems to always build on the disaster zone? I was watching a thing about the entire country of Nepal the other day, and basically it was a geological show talking about the creation of the Himalaya mountains and how the India plate was pushing up on it, causing this weird scenario where granite would be folded back up on itself, and then everything would be turned to liquid and put back up, and it just pushes the mountain up, 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 up. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but that is the mountain range in the world that's the most unstable, and it's because of the massive amounts of water from the monsoon that they have there. So there's erosion like no other place on the earth, and it's also on a big fault. There's a big fault that goes through the Himalaya mountains right where it's pushing over on the other plate. So you have millions of people that live in these shanty town type buildings that are made of, I'm going to say 2 to 3 level buildings that are built from brick and whatever material is available. And they're not very steady in the first place. Now, you find the same thing around Mexico City, and then you can just go on and on. You find out that all of the worst disaster zones on the planet happen to be right where they throw a city. I mean, it boggles the mind. Miami's got hurricanes. You have all of the big cities in the Gulf of Mexico that deal with hurricanes and tornadoes. And then you got L.A. They have massive tectonic issues there. And you just go up to San Francisco, up to Portland and Seattle, all of them. They're just prime for a disaster to happen. So what happens to those millions of people that live there? Well, most of them move at first if it's something big, right? And that's kind of why I brought up Chernobyl. It may not be over. And, a a lot of people agree that that was actually the cause of the fall of the Soviet Union, was the Chernobyl incident. It showed that the state couldn't run things the way that they portrayed it, and that system of things just couldn't last because they were putting themselves off at risk to save face of the illusion of their delusion. They couldn't let people know that the state could mess up in any way. And, we have plenty of that over here in the U.S. It's always pass the buck. They always have a scapegoat for it. They always tell you it's okay. But then you think about Lahaina and Hawaii and a lot of other places. What did government actually do for anyone? Nothing, really. So just think about all those places around the world where all of these millions of people live, depending on the idea that their government somehow is going to keep them safe, or that things are never going to change, as you were talking about before. Of course they're going to change. Everything is changing all the time. And that's what's so funny about the global warming nuts. They're still pushing this global warming thing. They're still bringing up that they said that they had the hottest day. Meanwhile, it's snowing in the Sierra Madres, and Montana's getting some dusting, I believe, at this time. So we have snow in the continental U.S. in the middle of August, or at the late part of August at least. All of the 30 named storms they said we were going to have, we didn't have them. Or we haven't had that many yet. So are they expecting 30 more storms to roll up in and wreak havoc? And then, you asked where all of that money would be coming from to rebuild infrastructure in new places. Well, obviously, there's a worldwide scam right now to take in funds. And that would be the climate change narrative, blaming it on man. And what boggles my mind is, what do you think is going to happen in those third world countries whenever they start up or restart industry? Well, they're going to now be the sources of all of the stuff they said was poison. But we should all know that's silly. That's why all of these guys have beachfront property around the world, and they fly around on their private jets because they're not worried about it. I saw a guy one time talking about how silly it was, the idea of man-made climate change, and I'm going to paraphrase him. He said, because all of the banks would stop giving loans. They'd stop giving loans to everybody buying houses, building houses, and all of that if they thought their investments would be destroyed in the next couple decades or 100 years even. The institutions couldn't survive unless they're gambling on it being cheaper to just restart. And see, that's kind of where I disagree with that guy. Is it's not that
was
they're
Dan
saying
Pena, by the way.
right, and he had a great argument. But what if those same people know there's a different kind of disaster or something that's going to happen that's completely unrelated to man, and they're willing to, cut their losses because it's cheaper to rebuild, it's cheaper to remake, and that kind of goes for all posed by the upcoming nominees for administration here. One of them wants to tax, and I have a feeling that no matter which side you pick, there will still be an angle of life that is being overcharged. I'll put it that way. And, wouldn't it be great if they really did hate the orange man, is to just go ahead and collapse the stock market and let him win? Just let him win and collapse everything. We kind of all know that they want to do it. The question is what trigger are they going to use or blame for that happening? Are they going to use migrants and police and locals fighting across Europe? Are they going to have some kind of crisis at our border? Is it going to be something bigger, kind of like I alluded to, like a Chernobyl type accident or a small nuclear exchange? I mean, they have so many cards in the playbook. The only thing we know is the end game result. And so if you're not You yourself personally and even your network of people are not going to some kind of new technological agriculture, we're going to have some serious problems coming up.
Meteorites. Exploding daytime bolides is your answer right there. Because the amount of bolides coming in and forecast to come in as our Earth sits in front of the sun and all the gas giants behind us, they're going to tug an enormous amount of stuff in through the face of our planet. You realize, everybody out there, that in April of this 2025 coming up, we're going to be the only thing in front of the solar system. And this only happens every couple thousand years. As we sit by ourselves as the only body in space in our local region here in front of our solar system, we will sit by ourselves in front of the sun, and every other planet will be behind us. But the thing is, they're going to be in a square, like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune will be in a square directly behind behind the sun, which will be like a spearhead. So everything will get pulled right into the face of our planet. It's going to be meteors and meteorites is your answer for that. And, you know, this illusion of delusion. Why was our world built out of glass and aluminum? Because it's disposable. Carved granite costs a lot. They knew the cycle was going to come right now. That's why they built our present world of glass and aluminum. It was disposable. Far cheaper to rebuild. You're right, Ransom. Thank you for joining us tonight. Remember, civilizationcycle.com. Head over there, put your email in. We'll get you the show notes for tonight. We appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Please spread this conversation. Start to build our world.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.